Roberts and Roberts Brokerage and Libertopia are pleased to present Antiwar.com versus the FBI versus Bitcoin by Angela Keaton, Director of Operations at Antiwar.com.
Hello, my name is Angela, and I'm the Director of Operations for a project known as Antiwar.com. It's part of the Randolph Bourne Institute. And we have different projects, but our primary one is Antiwar.com, a website where, I love this flag. I'm just going to put it over here, though, because anything confuses me. One of the things this has kind of been a source of recent interesting controversy, but I kind of want to give a little background on this. For the past few years, Antiwar.com, which is an anti-war site, just as it says, pretty straightforward, our mission is that, but it happens to be staffed by libertarians, which is what makes it unusual. The URL Antiwar came about in 1995, and what was interesting was the people who bought the URL and developed the site were not people from the left, but people who had ties to a philosopher, economist, activist you might have heard of named Murray Rothbard. So that begins the history of Antiwar.com. Actually, if in keeping really kind of with the themes of Libertopia and how essential and integral the anti-war movement is, it's really the most basic one, which is why I'm talking today about Antiwar.com versus FBI versus Bitcoin, because I'm going to get into a little bit here about what it is that libertarians, but specifically what we do at Antiwar.com, is such a big threat. It's not that it's not just the most controversial ideology as libertarianism, because we're not just merely atheists in the religion of the state, but we're actively undermining its central tenet that war is the health of the state. Anti-war movements have been under surveillance since the beginning. This is, World War I and so on. This is nothing new, and the people on the left will attest to this and are kind of more attuned to the history. And certainly, everyone here probably at least should read a little bit about a part of American history during the Civil Rights era and COINTELPRO. And the remnants of the hard left, and you find the anti-imperialist hard left still at places like Counterpunch, they're very, very well aware of this, because this is an ongoing drama for most people. In 2010, the FBI raided the homes of pro-Palestinian and anti-war activists in Chicago and Minneapolis, and you'll see on Twitter from time to time the hashtag #StopFBI, and that's what this is about, still following this story. The two different houses were actually raided. That means private homes where people live with their families were raided by FBI agents, where they're going through your possessions and digging things out and hauling them away. And of course, you can't stop these people, these criminals with guns and so on, who have come to your house and are taking and hauling off your things. That's a very horrible and scary thing, but it happened as recently as 2010. Jessica Sundin, who was one of the activists, she said to Democracy Now!, "It was attention to what happened, but really make it clear to people that we've done nothing wrong. There is no basis of the claim that in any way we've given support to terrorist organizations, but in fact it's attention placed on our work in the anti-war movement, in particular our perspective of solidarity with people in the countries where U.S. war and militarism are happening." So this is a very, very real thing, and it exists. So when Antiwar.com in late August of 2011 discovered that it was actually under FBI surveillance, well, at the time we realized that we'd been under some FBI surveillance, that we hadn't quite come to the point where we realized how extensive the surveillance was. It shouldn't have been a shock. It's disturbing, yes, but it shouldn't have been a shock given things. And we always joke in the libertarian movement about who's a Fed or who's listening now. Since in the era of Snowden, everyone's being spied on and everyone's being listened to, so there's no great distinction in that. But when you realize the organization you're working for, and particularly the people for whom you're working, are under close or some kind of FBI monitoring, things do change. The way you feel about how you interact with the world changes. You've got to I'd always handled it with a lot of denial. Okay, I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to continue to do what I do and not make any difference. But it has certainly changed the way people interact with Antiwar.com. This is another Libertopia where I realize it's going to be my last event for a long time, where Antiwar.com has a presence, because for 2015 we've got to cut the budget so far that we're not on the road at all in 2015, and kind of keep everything lean and tight, because our contributions definitely took a drop. I mean, there's different reasons, different periods, but it took a drop after the FBI surveillance became known. But it's a juicy story. How could you not tell people? Besides, it's the thing you ethically have to tell people, by the way, this site, and perhaps because your reading habits is being monitored by someone at the FBI. By the way, with the Jessica Sundin story, this one I just mentioned, as of January 2014, so this is still ongoing, 3 years after the FBI raided these people's homes, no one has been indicted and the search warrants remain sealed. So there's no one still knows in the 2010 case why those particular houses were raided, other than they'd been active anti-war activists and involved with pro-Palestinian causes. Where Antiwar.com begins is in late 2011, and that's where someone contacted my employer, Eric Garris, who's our webmaster, and said, on Scribd, there's a giant Freedom of Information Act request that somebody had gotten filled, and it lists all sorts of things about Antiwar.com and your editorial director, Justin Raimondo. And you can see where from there, the story really kind of, comes into focus. Under what grounds? It was yield, ash, and FISA, and I'll read the specifics. That's 50 U.S.C. Section 1801, if anyone's looking up on your smartphone. But it's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is one of the reasons why they were able to apparently, maybe as much as, rifle through Justin's weird habits in life and, like interesting details about people that could just easily be Googled. So it was kind of a weird file, but let me get to the meat of it. There's a couple things that created attention for the FBI. One was Antiwar.com had printed a terrorist watch list that had been available in other sources. We did not break the story, which is one of the few sites that did have that up. But in fact, there was something that seemed to draw the attention of the FBI in probably April of 2002, so post 9/11. And so that was also that. So that was one of the reasons. The other thing that might have been a contributing factor, and I always describe it as an issue ancillary to 9/11 because I don't want it, swept in with everyone's crazy conspiracy theories. It's got to be pretty serious, and we're kind of serious about keeping things tight that way because what we deal with, if there's any factual mistakes, that's how the empire discredits people repeatedly when they're not accusing them of sordid activities or taking money from foreign governments, which, by the way, came up in both the case that I mentioned in 2010 and in our case. One of the things found in the file was a question, are these people taking money from any foreign governments? Well, if we were, we probably wouldn't have to beg and fundraise and panhandle for peace so hard because, no, we're not getting magic bags of gold from other countries, though we do have foreign donors and we have a large foreign readership. There's people all over the world who do care about these things. But the ancillary issue was Justin Raimondo had written a story that people kind of know shorthand as the Dancing Israelis, the Israeli art mover story. And this seemed to trigger some interest in Justin's other writings. What it was the FBI it been discovered that basically rides on this one point that FBI had been not telling the entire truth when they in fact had been investigating a group of Israeli, I believe, movers, and perhaps and that they in fact had been a moving company, and that the people were under investigation by the FBI, and then the people were actually later, after a couple of years of questioning, were sent back to Israel. That's a news story that turned out to be perfectly legitimate, not conspiratorial, but that seemed to trigger a problem. And there's and it makes sense. From the perspective of what the FBI does in terms of trying to undermine the case for empire, it's very, very important that, people don't look too hard at our colonial enterprises. They don't look too hard at the kind of governments and people that we depose, and they're not keeping track of the patterns. And it's really important that mainstream news keep what I always call acontextual narratives about war. They're not necessarily deliberately lying to you, but the way the context is always framed about war and empire is that you're never getting anything but a very slight version of the story that's about this thin, so you can't see the larger picture when you step back and realize, oh, this is what we're doing, and this is really, really horrible. Not long after that, the people at Antiwar.com filed a series of Freedom of Information requests, and they want basically various staff members and Antiwar.com wanted to know what files were available. The FBI failed to respond to this request. So after that, the only thing we could do was that the ACLU could step in, and the ACLU of Northern California is handling this case, and we really, really appreciate that. And it's a really important case, too. After a year, the FBI has failed to produce any documents, so it was not clear that the editors had any idea how much information was being stored. But basically what the ACLU was suing on Antiwar.com's behalf for, specifically Eric Garris and Justin Raimondo, is to turn over all the relevant documents, all of them, unredacted, and make them available, and stop collecting records or continue, in other words, cease monitoring the site. By November of 2013, Spencer Ackerman reported in The Guardian something that was really, really amusing about our case. That the FBI was monitoring the site, in part because the agents had mistakenly believed that Antiwar.com had threatened to hack an FBI site. Now, how this came about is kind of amusing. Eric Garris had reported a threat because you figure you might as well leave a paper trail with the state, right? Because eventually, sooner or later, you might have to get the pigs involved, and it's a sad and weird, unfortunate reality of living in life under empire. But basically, somebody had written into Antiwar.com that they were going to hack the site. So Eric reports it to the FBI. The FBI codes this as editor of Antiwar.com threatens to hack FBI site. Very, very amusing. It involved a formal threat assessment that it's a site supposed to national security. But of course, Antiwar.com never threatened to hack the site, and the heavily redacted documents from the first sets that were shared with The Guardian showed Eric Garris, the site's managing editor, passed along to the Bureau a threat he received against his own website. So that's one of the many weird, amusing facts. Marcy Wheeler, who used to blog for Firedog Lake, and she does a great blog called Empty Will, where there's a lot of various, she does a lot of legal analysis of things dealing with the NSA and various human rights issues surrounding war and empire and the police state. And she did a great breakdown, and of the things that, when the FBI was forced now to start to release files, and a lot of these were basically whited out. At least the things that I saw, as opposed to the conventional, we think of it on television, the big black boxes. It's more like just whited out, and where people have been old-fashioned photocopying of, in other words, it's not very technically, it looks very, very old style is how these files look. One of the things the ACLU collected on the editors of Antiwar.com was 2 pages dating back to 1972, detailing a mock tribunal that Eric Garris served on as judge for representing the Peace and Freedom Party. I mean, that's kind of the historical assignment that's in those kind of documents, which I thought was really interesting as somebody's interested in libertarian history. I mean, I think that's great that the FBI is being so thorough. These things go on, in part because it's not just because Antiwar.com is doing anything, it's not because necessarily we're breaking stories. A lot of what we do is, aggregating the best news and the best compilations of sources, though we do break stories, and our news editor, Jason Ditzes, has done a few of these, but it's mostly really analyzing the news and compiling it in such a way that you can see that we have an anti-interventionist editorial stance, but all we're doing is looking at the facts as they actually exist and coming to these conclusions. So you don't need a libertarian ideology to understand why our foreign policy is a really bad idea. From a very pragmatic sense, it's clear that it's a horrible, horrible idea. But in the church of the state, the empire is like a holy pillar, and it's, what people in here are doing, why it's a threat and why libertarianism unnerves people and makes people feel uncomfortable, is that it's, the state is the religion, it's the church, and we're atheists in it, and that's a problem. Everything is about our nationalism, supporting war and empire, no matter where we go. And I rarely go into Starbucks, and the other day, though, there was certainly enough, a campaign to deal with veterans in a way that never, ever, ever suggests why we have veterans who have PTSD, or young people without limbs in certain cases, or people whose genitals don't work anymore because they've suffered horrible, horrible, wounds. It's that of problems that the U.S. has created, and insists on figuring out ways of getting people to still voluntarily enlist and to go off to faraway places to be horribly, horribly injured or maimed or emotionally scarred. The state really has to continue a certain amount of propaganda to continue that. But it's nationalism, the church of being an American, our identity as American, is really what the only thing the U.S. has. It doesn't really have adherence or respect of constitutional principles. And I mean, I'm not, we can debate I'm an anarchist too, I get that. But I mean, the whole constitutional issues of like that being a value, like saying God bless America meant, rights of freeing speech, right to assembly, right to being able to worship as you wished. Basically, for the most part, the government, it's supposed to exist in some form according to this, but not in any way that actually inhibits your privacy and in the regulation of your most intimate life activities. That part, has to continue on with a sense of nationalism, and that being an American we have a right to manifest destiny, as we used to call it in school, that we have a right to dominate the world, that we have a right to go and make things right, and that includes killing people, torturing people, maiming people, sending killer robots to wipe out families. That's a really horrible thing. And once you start questioning the most basic thing that we do, the thing we do best at, the thing we export the most of, and the thing that really does dominate our economy to a great deal, is that, we've questioned that. And I mean, as everyone in here too is a skeptic to varying degrees of U.S. foreign policy, with or without the libertarian attachment. When, as I've said earlier, libertarianism isn't necessary to understand why war, as a pragmatic sense, does not work. But also, it's 2014. It shouldn't be that hard to explain to people why mass murder is wrong. It seems that we've barely evolved as human beings if I'm still having conversations with people about why it's wrong to kill children in faraway places. That's something that, that's something that involves retraining how everyone thinks about other human beings, including when you see the maps and you assume, are there squiggles in those places? Those are human beings that are represented by those artificial political boundaries. They exist, they're real, and they have families just like you do, and they're going about their life's business like a lot of us do every day, and it's being horribly disrupted by U.S. foreign policy. So if I were the FBI, of course I'd be monitoring Antiwar.com. And I'd absolutely be questioning other anti-war groups, and I'd certainly ones that are, deal with issues in like justice for Palestinians, or people who focus on what's happening to the people who've been being tortured at Guantanamo all these years, a real dark hellhole right out of the dark ages, which just shows you just how culturally backward the U.S. is, and it must appear to others who, at least a few people on the planet, who must find that absolutely barbaric. It doesn't make it really. I mean, we think about the propaganda that's taught about nationalism, that's taught about Americans and the way we see things, and trains us for militarism. It's in all schools, public and private, to varying degrees, unless you go to some very offbeat school where you can design your own curriculum, or where the political attitudes are so counterculture that they would question very basics of the state and its role in foreign policies. And it starts really, really early. It starts with things like the Pledge of Allegiance. It starts people to think about what it's like to be in institutions all the time, so it's easier to get somebody to sign up to want to live the lifestyle that the military offers. And it's the one that can, it seems horribly and it's without question that it's no one questions, the value of that, thank a troop. We go through this on Veterans Day, always thank a troop, what does it mean? And then, of course, various anarchists and libertarian vets will say things like, don't thank me for my service, and explain why. And we get these long discussions on social networking that can be kind of tedious, but it's understand just the conflict of the role. It's that what does it mean to support the troops? I mean, yeah, most of us are supporting it with our tax money, and we're all paying taxes in some degree since we got here and we're in this room. We all contributed to the empire in some way. And that's a difficult thing that you always think about psychologically and emotionally, but most people never think about it. They're never forced to think about how their interactions, contribute to the state. And this weekend, why, I'm part of, very, very lucky that Antiwar.com has had immense help on its Bitcoin project because of Bitcoin Not Bombs, which is the tables over there. And I highly recommend you go speak to everyone there at Bitcoin Not Bombs and understand the mission about changing economies, about peace money, about getting people to being able to subvert the empire. But it goes, very basic things about Bitcoin where it just allows for more discretion. I mean, who wants to give to an organization that may be monitored? Well, a lot of people thankfully don't give a damn either way. They're just like, whatever. They don't care, and we're grateful to those people. But for those people who do care, and those people who don't want to have every aspect of their life monitored, one of the ways to circumvent that is through digital currency. And Bitcoin's the hot thing right now, but it could be something else in 2 years. And I'm kind of old school Austrian about these things. And, I learned as a little kid, real money is gold, it's silver, it's something tangible and hard. But digital currency is here, whether we like it or not. And it's a great opportunity to just be in the future now in terms of how we're going to do things with people and ways that we don't necessarily have to contribute to this ongoing project. And even in the 2 days since we've been here, General Dempsey said there's going to be troops on the ground in Iraq. Well, there's already troops, and Obama waited until the day after election to, double the troops on the ground, and it's going to keep going. And as someone pointed out to me yesterday, one of our donors had said, well, but we never really left Iraq, and that's true because there have been contractors, and the giant embassy, the huge legacy of the occupation of Iraq was still there, and you'll still find. From the right wing liberal shills in the U.S. known as the Democratic Party will say, well, Obama got us out of Iraq. Well, that's not patent nonsense. The status of forces agreement was in place, and basically when Maliki said, well, whatever's going to happen to those troops, too damn bad, Obama had to move everyone out. Years ago, I had a discussion, I think it was with Ernie Hancock, and I remember it really clearly. We were joking around saying, when Iraq ends, there's going to be that last person at a Saigon scene. There's going to be somebody crawling up the helicopter. That's how horribly this is going to end. And I'm not a soothsayer, and Antiwar.com doesn't make predictions, but that's pretty much, that's the inevitable end of this. But to keep it going, to keep the propaganda going, so many things have to happen, like people learning, bizarre history that twists everything in our favor, not anyone here, but that makes the U.S. seem like the hero, the victor, the one that's entitled to conquer the world. And we're going to have, people, it's the obvious cliche, what happened to the Roman Empire? What's happening to us? The constitutional guarantees we used to at least pretend to believe in, we no longer have. What holds our culture together is, cheap microwave ovens. Which is fine. I like cheap microwave ovens. I'm not disputing that, but it's not enough, though, to really, to build a distinct rah-rah sense of self that doesn't involve kooky nationalism. So that's why Bitcoin, not bombs. That's why digital currency. That's why I want to talk to you today. The case keeps updating. Lawyers keep meeting with Eric and Justin. The case continues, and there'll be lots more of excitement on that end, I believe, in this coming year. We can talk about when it come back in 2016. And hopefully by then, a lot more people will have given to Antiwar.com, if not the conventional way, then through Bitcoin. So thank you very much. You're all good, right? Oh, wait, Butler wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, the day before Jane and I drove down here, I saw something on the internet that I haven't seen elsewhere, and I don't even know if it's legit, but I wanted to see if you had any insight on it. Apparently back in the spring, a U.S. destroyer, the USS Donald Cook, decided to wander into the Black Sea, get as close to the Russian border as they could.
And about that time, a Russian fighter bomber showed up and flew over this destroyer. And I should point out that the destroyer is equipped with all of the up-to-date weapons, nuclear weapons, missiles, Tomahawk missiles, everything, radar, you name it. As the Russian plane flew over, it completely disabled the entire ship electrically. Anything that was operating through electricity was neutralized. And apparently, to the great dismay of not only sailors on board, but to the U.S. government. Now, I don't know, sometimes you read these things and you wonder if it's some of the contributors to Onion got loose or whatever. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, our news editor, Jason Ditz, had something to say about this very case. So,
how up to date can you get?
Well, this is from April of this past year, and it just said Russian Su Fencer fighter jet made multiple close-range, low-altitude passes at the USS Donald Cook earlier today in a move the Pentagon dubbed a deliberate provocation. Russia has not attempted to explain the incident. Pentagon officials said the plane refused all attempts at radio contact, but did not appear to be armed with any bombs, suggesting an Su-24MR, whatever, both reconnaissance planes. They said a second fencer was with the plane, but initially kept its distance. Yeah, we can find out what more here, but though this is just his conclusions, though ships don't pose a serious challenge to Russian naval control of the region, the real danger is rather that an incident like today's overflights could provoke a clash between U.S. and Russia, which it seems that there's some people really aching for such a new Cold War, or actually having it be a new hot war.
Well, the Laplanders are out, I guess. There's no sort of mistreating their reindeer. Part of the story that I read on that said that there were about a dozen passes that this Russian plane made over the destroyer in sort of a mock attack, as though this is what we could do, this is what we could do, this is what we could do. But the thing that I found interesting was that if true, the idea that this plane had something that could completely mobilize or immobilize, I should say, all electrically driven functions. I find very intriguing. Maybe we could get one.
Like something like that for the house. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I just want to get an update on Ukraine. I mean, have the Russians actually come in? Is it all propaganda? Are we ready to go? Is it World War III? Are we looking? I mean, from your opinion, what do you think's going on?
Yeah, I stopped following some stories and start following others. You have to read Jason Ditz. It's antiwar.com/news. And Jason's on top of the Ukraine story in a way. So is Robert Perry from Consortium News. He's really on top of that too. And you can hear interviews. If you don't want to read the stories, you can go to scotthorton.org and have interviews that Scott questioning both Jason and at different times Robert Perry on these subjects. So yeah, that's the last I heard of it. It does to me, I mean, this is as much political analysis as I'll give you. It does seem to be that it's mostly pushed by like generation 3 of the neocons, the really sloppy ones like James Kirchhoff, who just seem like, cartoon characters at this point, who seem to be pushing the new Cold War.
Oh, and the effort this spring to go to Washington, or you have anything update on that, or is there something you want to?
Nope, there's no updates on the anti-war sit-ins that Cindy Sheehan and others had planned for D.C. There's just not a huge surge of interest in anti-war activism. It seems that most anti-war activism, unfortunately, is still dwindled to now really small answer rallies. And once the Ron Paul campaign slowed down, Ron Paul seemed to be at least getting enough, the idea of Ron Paul seemed to be getting people back out on the streets for anti-war protests. But, that may not be the most effective thing. I mean, I know people are horrified to hear this in this room because I certainly don't like political action. But the way Syria was calmed down the last time was by people calling members of the Imperial Congress. The members of Congress, I mean, they're like simple animals. They respond to loss of money and power in a way that's very reactive, and they're really simple that way. They're very simple-celled, and if you call them enough times, enough people will call them and saying that you will not vote them out, or you'll make their lives in office miserable while they're there for the 2 to 6 years, that they will not vote on a war. I mean, these are not necessarily ideological people we're dealing with. They're certainly not principled ones, so why would you expect a coherent line of thought from the average member of Congress? They want to be voted back in, and they want money from different lobbyists. They don't care which ones, most of them. So that's the thing that will stop a war, is that kind of political action. And there's also direct action too, but I just don't see a whole lot of groundswell from what's left of the anti-war movement, which is basically the last of the anti-left and the anti-imperialist people and the libertarians. And I mean that in the broader sense. The broader libertarian movement seems to have gotten more anti-war the past few years. There's been a nice real shift in that direction. But that's still us that's supposed to be attending these events and making them, so I don't know what to do about the anti-war movement. I have no answer.
Okay, I have a question, but I'd like to start out with a quote that I've heard somewhere, and if anyone knows who actually said this, it'd be a great help to crowdsource the person. But they said that if people could see the actual images of war, it'd end tomorrow. And I think that's what journalists and websites like Antiwar.com do. They disclose information that isn't readily or vastly available for most people to judge on whether or not they would like to perpetuate an ongoing war. And considering not only this current administration's, but many past administrations, in fact, you could maybe argue almost every administration has sought to quiet dissent against war because, of course, this is a function of the state. What can you maybe elaborate on some maybe of the campaigns that you guys have waged to counter the targeting of journalism and anti-war activists and general dissent, and to turn the tables and show how the FBI is really wrong in this? Because apparently, I know I've heard this somewhere, maybe a civics class, that dissent has been the ultimate form of patriotism. So for the statists, not us anarchists, libertarians, voluntarists, you think they would honor a virtue like that, but is there any campaign or anything that you guys are doing to kind of turn the tables on the FBI and expose the nefarious and malicious actions that they're doing to pursue dissidents such as yourselves?
Well, it's funny. It's just a donor had sent an article this morning, and I was trying to figure out ways of incorporating it into what I'd already written down. But it just in recent years, reporting the news has become ever more dangerous activity. Between 2002 and 2012, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 506 journalists were killed worldwide. That's compared to 390 in the previous decade. Wow. So. There's lots of organizations and writers that I like on these topics, but it's if you do follow things like The Intercept, you will see updates on stories like this. This is just from The New Yorker today, and it's kind of written from more of a right-wingy sort of background, but the facts about the journalists are entirely accurate.
And then you have operations where for on social media where they suppress anti-war stories, and 500 deaths from journalists is a tragedy multiplied by 500 times. But then there's also the thousands, if not tens of thousands of journalists who've effectively been silenced one way or another. So whether that be harassment, we've seen through disclosures where very effective journalists with the national security state, doesn't matter which agency, will mine information on them and put that out. We've seen this with Martin Luther King, where they sent letters, the State Department sent letters saying that we're going to disclose your extramarital affairs or whatever embarrassing information it may be to silence the dissent. So this is a problem that needs to be maybe put more in the although it's not to say it's not being reported on, but maybe there ought to be maybe some newer types of campaigns to expose this and to get people who aren't necessarily aware of it and to actually do something. I'm not talking about protesting in the streets, but actually speak
Do you remember
up.
Eric Holder?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm already trying to forget. But, during his White House, right? I mean, his White House, well, during whatever he's the Attorney General czar of, White House, different records were subpoenaed. AP, Fox, journalists, New York Times, James Risen, who's like a very serious, actual honest-to-God reporter. We're not talking about someone's crazy half-brother lives out in the back who writes for InfoWars once in a while, which is fine, but this is what, if they're going after New York Times reporters, they mean business. Since the New York Times is, there's nothing controversial or daring in the New York Times, almost ever.
The effort by the Pentagon and the government to target journalists, and more than that, it's seeding the debate. It's the trolls, the people that go on Facebook and do it. That campaign. What do you know about that? I just get the headlines, but is that a serious brother thing?
I don't know. If people are referring to Facebook suppressing stories, I don't know. I don't really do much with Facebook beyond Antiwar.com has an account there, so I don't really know if they're actually suppressing stories. People complain about the algorithms, but I have no record one way or the other whether that's true or not. I'm in circles too where people post a significant amount of anti-war related stories. So I see plenty of it on Twitter anyway. I have no idea, though, compared to what it might be if things weren't suppressed, but I don't have any evidence necessarily that the social networks are involved in it in that way. Now, whatever other ways they're surveilling, we know, of course, from the Snowden revelations and others, that all these different various degrees are involved in NSA surveillance. So, that part of it is, that part of it we know. Well, we know for a fact. Like now, you can't just say it's your paranoid thoughts, Remember that crazy Ron Paul dude who was talking about, oh, national ID cards, they're going to do that someday. Yeah, well, and real ID and all these other things, all these things that sound like silly, crazy old man talk. It's just like, oh, that's true. That's the reality. It's hard to get people away because I think people aren't using so much discernment with news sources, and they're not kind of critically thinking their ways through. But there's all kinds of horrible ways every day that, yes, or the United States government is out to get you or out to get somebody. Certainly is out to get civilians in other countries where the governments don't do the bidding of the empire, and if they won't, you get overthrown. So, anybody else?
Hi, Angela.
Hey.
Hey, there was something I was thinking about before you started your talk, and that was this video that Walt Disney did. It was called A New Spirit, and before they had this short video playing before all the movies back in World War II, the penetration on the income tax was only about 10%. And then after the result of going to war, and then they playing this movie, and it's a long protracted war, and the movies were much more important back then. They had the increase in the penetration of income tax went to like 90% after the war, and then you have all these guys that are coming back. I mean, they've been shot at for 4 years, and all they're thinking about is probably, can I go back home where I can do my job and no one has to shoot at me? And now they've got this PTSD, and now they come back into society, and then they see everybody paying all these taxes, and then they just adopt it because it's like a psychological break or something. I don't know what it would be, but because they're...
I'll look that up.
And the other thing is, I want to mention this too. Okay. No, this other thing is that I posted this on Freedom's Phoenix, this video, and they took the video down. It's not viewable in the United States anymore.
Well, I definitely will look into that. I can't speak to that, but while I was thinking here about the war on journalists and the war on the information and the whistleblowers generally, it's that WikiLeaks, what an important and great thing that has been and that was. But the information came most likely from someone named Chelsea Manning, who's currently in a cage for telling the truth about the Iraq War. So if you do tell the truth, there's a good chance you might spend 35 years in a cage.
Do you have a comment on Assange's article in Newsweek about Google?
That Google's probably horrible. Yeah, it ran on Antiwar.com. Yeah, sure, it's horrible. Yeah. Sure. But Google Calendar is great. So not only the feds know where I am, but I get to places on time too, and my time management has improved significantly since I've started using it. And why spend more taxpayer money, I doubt they're actually literally following us around, by the way. I don't think that's how any of this works. It works at weirder and more subtle levels. And it is kind of creepy to know that, your bosses are being watched all the time. But yes, Chelsea Manning, because I was going to say that, someone was willing on this past Veterans Day when we were all thanking the troops. That's one vet, or I guess still how that all works, active duty when you're in the cage. That's somebody that we should be really grateful and thankful toward, and that's really a role model of courage. And she admitted in the chat log she was a libertarian, so she's part of our community, and we should be really, really grateful that someone had the intestinal fortitude to go ahead and do something like that, what she did. So. All right. Oh, wait, one more.
I'm reminded of Howard Zinn's classic remark, the problem is not civil disobedience, the problem is civil obedience.
Yes. All right, thank you guys for listening. We'll be back in a year.
Thank you for watching this presentation. Visit Roberts & Roberts online at rrbi.co for all your precious metals needs. Roberts & Roberts not only accepts Bitcoin, they prefer it. If you enjoyed this video, also consider donating to Red Pill Productions.